In this week's podcast, you'll learn 12 useful expressions and idioms connected to work so that you can expand your vocabulary and improve your English. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Bea and Craig.
Hello, and if you're a new listener to the podcast, you're very, very welcome. My name's Craig.
And my name's Bea.
And together with many years of teaching experience between us, we're going to help you improve your English and take it up to the next level. Welcome, new listeners. But if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, I know what you're thinking. Where's Reza? Well,
wow, good question. That's the question on everybody's lips.
Very sadly and unfortunately, Reza has caught COVID. So he's at home recovering. He's doing okay. He sends his best wishes, but obviously he won't be able to record the podcast for a couple of weeks. So I'm really excited to welcome Bea to the podcast.
I'm absolutely delighted to be able to join you, Craig. And yes, best wishes and a speedy recovery to Reza.
Absolutely. Now, if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, you may remember Bea because way back in episode 18, Bea joined Reza and I on the podcast to talk about the present perfect simple and continuous. Do you remember that?
Oh, goodness me. It's taking me back to the past, I tell you.
Yeah, that was back in 2014, Bea.
No, it can't be.
And in 2018, you came back to join us again to talk about how to take your relationship to the next physical level in English. That was episode 183. So if you want to listen to Bea, go back to inglespodcast.com/18 and /183 for those two episodes. Now, Bea, obviously a long time's passed since then. What are you working on at the moment? What are you doing? Anything exciting to tell us?
I certainly have, Craig. I mean, there have been lots of changes in my life, both personal and on the work front. The biggest, most important change in my life is that I've decided to become freelance. And I'll be offering a whole range of English language-related services. So I'll be doing that as from the 1st of July.
That sounds really exciting. All the best with that new adventure. And if you would like to contact Bea for more information, just send me an email at craig@inglespodcast.com and I will send it on to Bea.
Thank you.
So let's get started with this week's topic. We're going to speak about idioms connected to work, idioms and expressions. But first of all, if you're not sure what an idiom is, can you help them, Bea?
I mean, I think for our Spanish listeners, one of the things that some students or some people say, oh yes, I speak many idioms, thinking that an idiom is in fact idioma in Spanish. Well, in fact, an idiom is a group of words that have a meaning that's different from the meaning of the individual words. A couple of examples could be over the moon or see the light.
I'm over the moon to be doing this podcast with Bea this week. Now, that doesn't mean I'm jumping over any moons or I'm up in space or in a rocket somewhere. It means I'm very, very happy. So obviously, you're taking words and you're giving a different interpretation, a different meaning to them.
It's the same as see the light. Sometimes if you're in a very complex situation, you're just trying to understand something or comprehend a situation. And finally, you get to the end after much thinking and trying to sort it all out, and you finally see the light. It means you actually get to understand a situation.
And we hope that you'll be able to see the lights of the idioms we're going to explain to you today, connected to work. So let's get the ball rolling. What's the first one?
Oh, that's a nice one. So to get the ball rolling is to make a start. So let's get the ball rolling with our first idiom.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of football. If you watch a game of football and it's just starting and you've got the two teams facing each other, the ball's in the middle, the referee blows the whistle, what happens to the ball?
It gets rolling.
Exactly.
And can I just say, I think it's just come to my mind now, but I think that's a really nice thing to do with idioms. If somehow you can visualize the words and the actions, it might help you remember those idioms and expressions.
Yeah.
So I really like that example you've just given. Another one, which is quite, it's connected to work, is to learn the ropes. And that really means, to obtain experience of how a job is done. So today I'm learning the ropes because it's only the third podcast I've recorded with Craig.
But it seemed to me that you always knew the ropes as far as microphone techniques concerned. And that's something I've been struggling with Reza for many, many years. And Reza, I hope you're listening.
Well, that's a low blow. Know the ropes means to have experience of how a job is done. So, yes, Craig, you could say, I do know the ropes as far as a microphone is concerned.
Yeah, Reza is a wonderful podcaster. He's very, very professional, but he does tend to go off microphone sometimes or sometimes get too close. So I've showed him the ropes many times. That's another common collocation.
Oh, yes.
You can show somebody the ropes to tell them, explain to them what's needed. And then when they take it on board, they accept it, they do it, get used to it, then they know the ropes. And that probably comes from sailing, right? When back in the days when they had ropes on ships.
Oh, that's a really good example, actually. It
I'm guessing.
might well do. I mean, it sounds perfectly plausible. So, yeah, I would go along with that, Craig. I would say that is where the origin of the idiom.
Now, Bea, you've been a teacher for many years. Would you say that teaching is a cushy job?
Oh, cushy. A cushy job would mean it's an easy job. It's a job that's undemanding. And I would say that teaching is not a cushy job. Do you know how many exams I've had to correct in my lifetime? Do you know how many hours I've had to teach the present perfect? Simple and continuous. It's a tough job. It can be a tough job. However, when I was at university, I had a really cushy job, which was incredibly well paid at the time and was very undemanding. I was at the end of a phone. I was basically a receptionist and had to do very little. So that was definitely a cushy job. How about you?
I think the cushiest job I've ever had probably is teaching, but it's not everything that's around the teaching. It's not the administration. It's not the lesson preparation, not the marking that you mentioned. It's the being with the students and actually having the lesson. Because very often it feels like I'm talking to friends and it's a pleasure to teach. So the teaching itself is very cushy, but everything around it can sometimes be a bit of a pain.
I completely agree. 100%.
And one other thing, when we mentioned before about the ball rolling, creating an image in your head, when I think of the word cushy, I think of cushion, something you sit on. So if you can imagine Bea as a receptionist sitting on a very comfortable cushion, you could make perhaps the connection between cushy and cushion.
Well, there you are.
A very comfortable job in a nice seat, relaxing.
I don't think I'll ever be able to get rid of that image ever again.
Now, sometimes you're not teaching, you're not in a receptionist job, but you don't have a job at the moment. Now, one student said to me years ago when I asked them what they did for a living, she said, I'm on the dole, which is an expression you can use when you're collecting money from the state because you are unemployed. Of course, you can always say, I'm unemployed, but we have better ways of saying that, don't we, Bea?
Well, definitely. I mean, well, you don't know me, the listeners don't know me, but I'm quite elegant. And another way of saying I'm on the dole or I'm unemployed, you could say I'm between jobs. So it actually means you're temporarily unemployed. And it's true for me. This year, I have been between jobs. So at some points in the last year, I've been unemployed. And other times I've been employed or working. So when people say to me, oh, Bea, what do you do? I say, well, I'm actually between jobs. And something else I like to say, which also sounds quite elegant and quite nice, I think, is to say, I'm weighing up my options, which means that I'm thinking about some jobs I may want to do in the future. and what the pros and the cons, the advantages and disadvantages are of those jobs. So one of the expressions I might say is, I'm actually between jobs at the moment and weighing up my options before moving on.
Very nice. Remember, if you would like to see all these expressions and the examples written, go to the show notes. You will find those at inglespodcast.com/422. Now, our next interesting, useful expression you could use connected to work is to burn the candle at both ends. To burn the candle at both ends. What does that mean, Bear?
Oof, well, that's not actually something I'm very good at doing. It actually means that you're working or doing other things from early in the morning until late at night. And the consequence of this, of course, is that you get very little rest. And I'm a person who does need their 9 hours sleep. So just so that you can understand and see this particular idiom in context, you could say people who have a full-time job and a side hustle that they do in the evenings and at weekends run the risk of burning the candle at both ends and suffering from stress and exhaustion. So it's not a particularly good thing to be doing, I don't think. And it certainly isn't good for me. I get really grumpy and very irritable if I burn the candle at both ends. How about you? Are you a person who likes to do that, Craig?
Not at all, and I do get grumpy and miserable, especially if I don't get enough sleep. But have you ever been in a position where you've been burning the candle at both ends because you had 2 or more jobs, for example, when you were studying and you had a side hustle, which is a job on the side, an extra job to create extra income?
Do you know what? I'm just thinking about this, and my answer has to be yes, because when I was a student, I used to leave my studying before an exam until the very last minute.
You crammed.
I crammed, yeah. And apart from that, also when I was studying, I had a part-time job because I needed the money to be able to pay the fees at the time. And so very often I'd be studying for several hours, then looking at my watch, thinking, oh my goodness, I have to go off and work at the bar where I was working. That was my side hustle. And getting to bed really, really late and burning the midnight oil. I was working late into the night or even the early hours. Not a good situation.
So if you were working into the early hours, you were burning the midnight oil.
Absolutely.
Which is our next expression. If you work late into the night, go back to the days before electricity, maybe even before candles, when people used to work and live by burning oil in their houses. To burn the midnight oil means to work very late, to work until 2 or 3 in the morning or even later.
Exactly.
And when you mentioned working in a bar when you were a student, I worked in a bar. Not when I was a student, after I stopped studying, and it was a very cushy job.
Really?
I really enjoyed it because
Why?
it was more or less full-time for me. So I was there full-time and I wasn't working behind the bar in shifts. So I was more like the bar manager.
Okay.
So I could step the other side of the bar and make sure everybody else was doing their job and have a drink and sit on a nice cushion. It was a very cushy job.
Well, I could imagine you sitting on the cushion with your very cushy job.
And falling off the cushion after I'd had too many beers.
Well, that's the other thing. It must have been a definite advantage to being the bar manager.
And one more thing that the listeners might be interested to know when you're speaking about working late and burning the midnight oil, remember those 2 expressions that we have mentioned before. If you like working late into the early hours of the morning, you can call yourself a night owl. However, if you prefer to get up early and do your work in the morning, you're an early bird.
Oh, I'm definitely
Which are you?
well, Craig, I'm definitely an early bird. I like getting up. I like doing my yoga. I like doing my exercise in the mornings. I just can't do anything at night.
Have you always been that way?
Do you know, that's a really good question, and I don't know if I have. I don't know whether it's age that's made me into an early bird, because I used to be a night owl, but I don't think it was out of choice. It was because the rest of my friends and social circle enjoyed going out to bars and discos until all hours. And I just used to be there, so I didn't want to suffer from FOMO, FOMO, fear of missing out. How about you?
Exactly the same, but I think going back to when I first started La Mansión del Inglés, for example, I did burn the midnight oil. I worked until 2 or 3 in the morning because I tended to think clearer at that time. However, over the years, I've now turned into an early bird, and my clarity when I do focused work is nearly always in the morning.
Excellent.
Too tired after lunch.
Well, exactly. Which is why we're here now.
Not too tired after midnight, notice. Too tired after lunch these days.
This is what it's come to, Craig.
Now, changing focus a little bit and looking at some different idioms, a glass ceiling. Now, that's also connected to work. And obviously, because we're talking about idioms, it doesn't literally mean the ceiling is made of glass. What's a glass ceiling in the workplace?
Well, that's a really good question. And the answer would be a glass ceiling, we could say, is like a barrier to advancement in a profession. We use it especially because it affects women and members of minorities. So, for example, there seems to be more of a glass ceiling in the tech industry than in teaching, which would mean
it's easier to go up the ladder and advance in the education, in the area of education, than in a tech business, for example, because tech companies tend to be more male-dominated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what it would mean, a glass ceiling.
Our next expression is to have a game plan, to have a game plan. Back into the world of sports for this idiom. And a game plan, if you have one, you have a carefully considered strategy. You have a plan. You've calculated your next moves. For example, it's really important to have a marketing game plan before you launch a new product.
Because if your product is unsuccessful, you're going to have to go back to the drawing board, which means to go back to square one, to start again. Some people might say, oh no, I failed my B2 first exam. Okay, well, back to the drawing board. It means to go back and start again.
Of course, if you do not pass your B2 first exam, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go completely back to square one, back to the drawing board. If you go to englishmasterclass.net, there's a course there that will prepare you very, very well to pass the B2 first exam. englishmasterclass.net. Now, before we started recording this podcast, Bea and I were talking a little about customer service here in Valencia. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And when it's bad, it can be very, very bad. So we both agreed, I think, that in some places in Valencia and maybe in Spain in general, they need to raise the bar.
Definitely.
When it comes to customer service. Do you agree?
Oh, don't get me started, Craig. I mean, what a week I've had with some really poor customer service. And I really do think they need to raise the bar. They need to increase their standards. They need to make things better. It doesn't just happen in Valencia or Spain, because I've got quite a few horror stories of UK-based companies who also need to raise the bar. If we're talking about work, a nice expression or a sentence to give you a context for this would be, just as I was getting used to my job, my boss raised the bar and I had to perform even better.
And again, we can use a sports analogy, because if you think of the Olympic Games where they jump over the bar, if they're high jumping or they're pole vaulting and they need to get over that bar that's very, very high, if you raise it higher, you're raising the quality of that sports person. So to raise the bar means to increase standards, raise the quality, and basically raise your game, you could say.
Absolutely.
Now, to have your work cut out for you, what does that mean? Well, It means that you have a lot of work to do to complete a particular task. Now, at the moment, as we're recording this in June 2022, there are a lot of wildfires happening in the north of Spain. And obviously, the fire service has its work cut out to get these wildfires under control. They really have a big job to do. It's a huge challenge for them to put out and extinguish these fires. So they've got their work cut out for them. Well, Bea, I think we had our work cut out today to create a podcast in Reza's absence.
Well, I mean, the
bar
was certainly very high, and I really had to up my game. It certainly wasn't a cushy job, and I certainly feel as if I've had to learn the ropes.
Well, I think you've done splendidly well, and I think we've helped people today. So hopefully you'll be able to use these expressions, practice them in an email this week, or if you're speaking to friends online and practicing your English. And now it's your turn, because we would like to hear from you. We'd love to get a voice message from you. You can do that by going to speakpipe.com, speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. And send us an email with a comment or question. You can reach me at craig@inglespodcast.com. Or if you'd like to work with Bea, send me an email and I will make sure that she gets it. Bea, can you remind people what you are doing to help people with their English?
Of course I can. What I'm doing is going freelance at the beginning of July, the 1st of July, and I'm offering quite a few services. You might have a job interview, which you might have to do in English. If you do and you need some help with your pronunciation or the format, get in touch. It might be because you have to do a presentation at work in English. If you need some help, get in touch. You might want general English classes or exam preparation classes. Just get in touch. I'm doing absolutely everything, and they could be one-off classes or lessons, or they could be a series of lessons throughout the whole academic year. Either way, look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
And let's hope that Bea doesn't burn the candle at both ends with all the work that she's got coming up this summer.
I certainly have my work cut out for me, Craig.
Yes, you do. If you want to reach Bea, send me an email. Again, craig@inglespodcast.com. And if you're looking for a paid course to study by yourself, go to the online store at store.mencioningles.net. And before we go out the door today, we'd like to thank all of you who are helping by supporting this podcast on Patreon. You can join the Patreon program for as little as $1.20 per month. That's including VAT. And by doing that, you get instant access to recent transcriptions. Go to Patreon, patreon.com/inglespodcast. Links, as always, in the show notes at inglespodcast.com. And we'd like to say a huge thank you to our latest supporters. Unfortunately, we can't mention everybody who signed up for the program, but special thanks this month to Juan Miguel Maribel Gonzalez, Ana Robles, Marga Arisa, and Lucas Campos da Silva Moraes. Thank you very, very much. And what's next week, Bea?
Well, my favourite topic, well, it's connected to my favourite topic, which is food. And we're going to be looking at food idioms. Yum, yum.
Yum, yum. Can't wait to taste that episode next week. Thank you so much for listening this week. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends. Until next time, it's goodbye from Bea.
And it's goodbye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.